Okay, Sarah, she's here. Promote to panelist. Good. Okay, so hi everyone, welcome to our webinar. Just to let you know that there is some interpretation available, so English to French, if you would like to listen to the webinar. So I will let the floor to our three panelists. So we have Simon Peck, Kevin Melsip, and Sarah Dehuch. And also we have our interpreter, André, and also, yes, if you have any question, please use the Q&A or the chat, and also please let us know where you are so we can just confirm that all Canada is here into this webinar. So thank you for your time and enjoy your webinar.
Thank you so much, Grace, and welcome everyone. We're so delighted that you could be here to attend our session today. So in this webinar, as advertised, we will focus our attention on cooperatives' internal democracy, why it matters, and why it can be so hard to sustain as cooperatives grow. But also a key part of our focus will be on identifying innovative solutions to overcoming these challenges, particularly through a newer set of tools called democratic innovations. So just by way of introduction, my name is Simon Peck, and I'm a faculty member at the Gustafson School of Business at the University of Victoria. And alongside, we have two excellent panelists who have taken the time out of their schedule to share their thoughts on this question. And that's Kevin Millsip, who serves as the Executive Director of the BC Libraries Cooperative, and also from Belgium, Sarah Dehuch, who serves as the Senior Public Affairs Officer for the General Development Unit of Belgium-based Smart Co-op. So we really hope that today's session can generate a broader conversation about the importance and different ways of practicing democracy in cooperatives. And I personally would love to continue this conversation with anyone who's interested afterwards. So our game plan for today's session, you'll be hearing from me for about 10 to 15 minutes. Basically just some frame setting where I'll discuss some key background information that you're all probably aware of about democracy and cooperatives, why it matters, and then also introduce these ideas about democratic innovations. And we'll then have Kevin and Sarah each do about a 15-minute or so presentation sharing their experiences on this topic. And then we'll have ample time at the end to have a free-flowing discussion and any questions you might have for any of us about this topic. So first of all, why does democracy matter for cooperatives? So as many of us likely take for granted, democracy is absolutely central to cooperatives functioning. It's not only among their key values and distinguishing factors, but it can also have major implications for their members and the way they operate and are able to sustain themselves in the future. So members get the ability to, and the opportunity to become better democratic citizens, sharpen many important skills, and have a lot more agency in shaping their own and society's broader destiny. From the operational side, democracy can bring immense benefits, whether through building loyalty and commitment, tapping into a broader range of solutions and perspectives and interpretations of issues, or even just developing a distinct brand that can help the co-op stay more competitive. And as we can see just as one example, the growing movement of platform cooperatives highlights the stark difference between the reality and vision of working for a capitalist platform and a cooperative competitor in that space. So then moving on, how is democracy typically practiced in a cooperative? So again, as we all probably know from our own experiences, cooperatives that grow beyond a relatively small size tend to adopt what's often called a dual structure system that includes elements of direct democracy and also representative democracy. On the direct side, members have the opportunity to participate in general meetings where they can discuss and vote on important matters. They're kind of seen as the main sovereign body of the cooperative. They can also participate in the election of their representatives, who are then tasked with making decisions, including appointing and monitoring the performance of the general manager, preparing materials for consideration at the General Assembly, and making certain strategic decisions directly. So when you think about it, for most everyday members, in this model, the main ways you can participate are to attend general meetings, vote for your preferred representatives. Though of course many cooperatives do go above and beyond this in certain ways. And so what are some of the problems we face with the current system? So while it definitely sounds good on paper and especially goes miles ahead of the systems in place in cooperatives, more capitalist competitors, there's some issues that research and practice suggests that seem to apply to a wide range of cooperatives. And again, their manifestations will likely vary significantly across co-ops, but you might find some of the following are relevant to your cooperative. So when it comes to the annual general meeting, here are some things that have been found consistently in previous research. So only a small percentage of members might actually attend the general meetings. Of those who do, many might not participate actively, and those who do participate actively might not sound or look like the broader membership. The agenda and resolutions have often been preset by the board, which limits participants' ability to have a truly open debate and discussion about whatever strategic matters are important to them. The meetings can sometimes feel very rushed and formalistic and feel out of touch with, the way everyday members might enter those spaces. And some votes are not always taken seriously or with much reflection and introspection. And so when it comes to then the representative portion of cooperatives, again, there's some issues that we see consistently across research. So representatives tend not to be descriptively representative of the broader membership, whether based on things like occupation, gender, or education level. Due to elections, representatives may be beholden to the interests of those who help them get elected. They might also behave in a self-interested manner and pursue agenda items other than those the broader membership might want. And over time, they might become increasingly perceived as out of touch and disconnected from everyday members. So again, some of you may recognize these or other challenges in your cooperatives, though I want to emphasize that they're by no means universal. So at their worst, when members essentially cease to actively participate and their representatives increasingly lose touch with members, life in the co-op can sometimes start to feel a little bit more like life in other organizations, and that goes against the entire rationale why we have cooperatives in the first place. So thankfully, cooperators and researchers have long had an eye on these problems, and some have spent a significant amount of time looking for ways to overcome these challenges. So if any of you are interested, I could point you to some really useful resources in this space. But just a couple of solutions or categories of solutions that have been brought up. People have suggested redesigning cooperative structures, adopting things like holacracies or sociocracies as a way to increase member participation. There's been a lot of emphasis on sharing information in a much more transparent, but also much more accessible manner so people can digest it. Reducing any knowledge and status gaps between leaders and everyday members, developing more inclusive democratic cultures, creating a broader array of spaces for members to share their perspectives with their representatives, like Mondragon's social council, for example, and holding meetings a lot more frequently. So these are, of course, very important recommendations that can have major impact on improving cooperatives' democracy. And again, I imagine many cooperatives have used some of these or would see very important gains if they systematically looked at how these work together and adopted them in their co-op. In addition to these, and what I want to focus on in the last few minutes of my introduction, I think we can learn a lot from advances in political science on different ways of tackling these sorts of long-standing challenges. So over the years, I personally have become particularly fascinated by a growing body of research in political science focused on what's called democratic innovations. So as Graham Smith, a pioneer in this field of research, calls them, they're institutions that have been specifically designed to increase and deepen citizen participation in the decision-making process. And they're innovations in the sense that they represent a departure from traditional institutional architecture that we normally attribute to advanced industrial democracies. So while we're seeing more and more of these democratic innovations in our society, and Canada was once, and in some ways still is, a pioneer in this space, we curiously haven't seen them used much in other democratic organizations like cooperatives or unions. So there are literally dozens of examples of democratic innovations out there, and we by no means have time to cover all of them in much detail. But I wanted to highlight a couple of common strategies to give us a flavor for how they could help improve and sustain cooperatives' internal democracy. And again, maybe they'll just provide some food for thought for our later discussion. What I find particularly exciting about them, though, is that they're highly flexible, particularly in terms of whether they can be done online or in person or in some kind of hybrid format. So let's start with deliberative mini-publics. So in essence, they bring together a descriptively representative group of people that is a true microcosm of the population through random selection. And it gives this microcosm of the population a chance to have structured learning and deliberation processes about whatever the topic is. And there are a lot of practices in place to make sure things are, well facilitated, everyone gets a chance to speak, etc. But in essence, it gives an opportunity for, people, as if everybody who's part of the population could be in a room to really engage and deliberate about a topic. Random selection at least helps make sure that the people who are there would broadly represent the population. So there's tons of cool examples, again, in the public sphere, whether the BC Citizens Assembly on Electoral Reform from 2004 that was pioneering in many ways, or more recently, there have been some on Brexit in the UK, COVID-19 in Michigan, or climate change in France. At my own university, we just did one on democratic engagement with students, which was a lot of fun and a very cool way of engaging students. So what does this have to do with cooperatives? So I see tons of potential applications, whether for setting the agenda for strategic initiatives or policies to then enable other decision makers to refine them about how they could be addressed. It could also be through a body that can adjudicate human resource decisions, such as whether to discipline members of a cooperative if there's some questions about whether they're upholding the standards. It could be a body that offers regular advice and feedback to the board of directors, or it could be a way to stay in touch with the informed perspective of different stakeholders, such as customers of a cooperative. So just to wrap that up, their biggest strengths are that they're highly inclusive and they can enable us to really deliberate in depth about a particular topic to understand, the best reasons for and against something. So again, this is something I would love to explore with any of you if you want to test this out in your organization in the future. Some of you may have heard of participatory budgeting, which is again another really cool innovation. So it started off in Brazil as a way in which any interested citizens in a particular jurisdiction could participate in discussing and then voting on how to spend a preset portion of public funds. There's a lot of different structures, though usually they include a stage in which the process is designed, then a stage in which ideas are brainstormed, proposals are developed, and proposals are then voted on and implemented. So it's now been done in, I think, over 3,000 cities around the world. In Canada, those include Toronto and Victoria. So they are very inclusive in that they are open to all who want to and are able to participate, and they give those attending decisive power, at least in a specific subset of allocating resources. Again, in cooperatives, I see a lot of potential applications for these. So for example, in terms of deciding how to allocate the full portion or at least part of the surplus funds on things like community development or advocacy initiatives. Now, finally, I want to just talk about initiatives and referenda, and I put more in brackets because as you likely know, co-ops already are centered around the use of some of these practices. So just as a recap, in an initiative, citizens can propose a new law or amendment that goes to referendum after a specified number of people sign a petition to let it go forward. In the case of a referendum, citizens can challenge an existing electoral law in a referendum, again, after collecting enough signatures. So in most co-ops, both initiatives and referenda are available, but they're often relegated to the AGM, where it can be quite socially costly to put forward a new initiative or challenge an existing rule or policy in front of all your peers once a year when you meet at the AGM. So they do exist, but I think we could take them up to a significantly broader level. Again, giving more voice to the main sovereign body of the cooperative, which is the membership. So one extremely cool example of an initiative model was used and developed by Stocksy for soliciting and acting upon member suggestions. So they have a very intricate process for going from people pitching an idea to starting a discussion, and then eventually the idea can then be implemented through a final vote if it goes through certain steps correctly. So again, they're very inclusive and decisive, though some of the limitations are that they lack significant deliberation and can be prone to manipulation in some cases, as we've seen in the political realm. But again, there's a lot of ways through which that can be prevented. So I think cooperatives could institute initiatives and referenda much more broadly, whether as a means of giving decisive power or consultation. And there's literally endless amounts of decisions they could do this on. So that was a very brief introduction to our session today, where the main points I hope that I was able to convey somewhat are that democracy is foundational to cooperatives and their success. Democracy in cooperatives rarely lives up to its full ideal. And there's tons of very exciting ideas out there, big or small, innovative or mainstream, that we can experiment with in different combinations to improve democracy in cooperatives. So that's it for my introduction, and you'll see me in the Q&A as well, but I'll stop sharing slides now and we'll pass it over to Kevin Millsip. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Simon. Can you just nod if you can hear me, Simon? Yeah, cool. Okay, thanks. Hi, folks. My name is Kevin Millsip. My pronouns are he, him. I live on the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people in the west end of Vancouver. So thanks for joining us today, and thanks for the invitation to share some thoughts. I am the executive director of a co-op called the BC Libraries Cooperative. So I'll just take a couple of minutes to tell you a little bit about what we do at the Libraries Co-op, how we're trying to practice member engagement, and some of our thoughts for where we want to go next. So a little bit about the co-op. The co-op is about 12 years old, and our mandate is to help libraries help people. We do that mostly through open source technology. So the members of our co-op are organizational. Mostly public libraries, but other kinds of organizations as well, and I'll explain what those are in a minute. We've got right now 212 members across Canada. So in each one of those members is an individual organization. So I'll give you a couple of examples. There are 72 public library systems in British Columbia. All of those public library systems are members of our co-op. We have a growing number of post-secondary colleges and universities that are becoming members. We have a lot of childcare centers that are members, some public schools, some museums, some galleries, and then other organizations like sort of physicians associations and others. And so in a nutshell, what we do in terms of we provide open source technology to our members. So membership fee is $50 for a lifetime membership. And then after that, the services and the projects we offer are opt-in. A couple of the key things that we do is if you have ever gone online with your public library to see, hey, I'm looking for this book, I want to see if they have it. And if so, if maybe they have it, or an audiobook or something, or a magazine or a newspaper, it's like, I want to download a copy, I want to reserve it, whatever it is, all that stuff behind the skin of your public library's website is stuff that we do. So we have these systems that allow libraries to basically talk to each other so they can share their collections with one another within certain geographic regions. And then when you and I are on the website trying to find whatever it is, you know, the Bernie Sanders new autobiography or whatever, all the search mechanisms and all that jazz, that's our stuff doing that behind the screen. We do basic stuff like provide websites to libraries. And then one of our very large projects is called the National Network for Equitable Library Services. It's a mouthful. Basically what we do is we create books, or we take books and we put them in a form that is accessible for someone who has a print disability. And a print disability can range from anything from total blindness to visual impairment to a cognitive or physical disability that inhibits your capacity to read or use or manipulate a book. So we make audiobooks, we make Braille, print Braille, electronic Braille, and then we take electronic files of books and we make them accessible because most of them aren't actually in an accessible format. So that's the core of what we do. We've got 45 staff. Everybody pretty much works from home. We have staff from BC to Quebec. I live in Vancouver, and as I mentioned, and a lot of my work is basically lobbying for libraries. So I work with the federal and provincial governments to either get them to do good things to support libraries or to stop to do stuff that's going to hurt libraries, in a nutshell. So I'll talk a little bit about our governance structure. Of the 212 members, we have 8 board members. Each of those board members works for one of our member organizations. We have a range of representation. So we have people from public libraries, from academic libraries, and geographic representation as well. And that's built into how we try to structure the board. My hope is to add someone to the board who does not come from the membership, but someone who works in co-ops, so they can bring a cooperative perspective to what we do. I should say, I don't come from libraries. I don't come from technology. I actually come out of community organizing and social justice work and municipal politics. And so when this board was looking for a new ED, they were looking for someone who didn't come from the sector because they wanted someone who might approach things differently than people who are trained in library of sciences. I try to do that. Okay, so how in terms of member engagement, there's a few things we do. None of this stuff is earth-shattering, but here's some things we do. On every board agenda is a standing item called a member engagement moment, and that is always on the agenda, whether we have a request to use it or not. And we consistently let members know that there's a spot on the agenda where anybody can come and bring questions to the board, bring ideas, bring conversations. And this actually comes from a period early on in the co-op's history when there was some tension with a number of the members around some of the work the co-op was doing. And so this was one thing that was done to have a constant space where members could bring their voice to the board of the co-op. We have advisory committees for all the projects that we work on, and those are made up of members who are somehow connected to those projects. So all of our service areas we call them business function groups, but they actually set the strategic direction for those projects. So they will decide what kind of enhancements and changes we're going to make to those projects and services. They'll be a part of the decision making for, we also do, I should say, Consortia Licensing. So we buy stuff for libraries. The members get together, decide what kind of licenses they want, and then we negotiate directly with the companies on behalf of the membership. The idea being that collectively we can afford more than anyone could on their own, and we have more clout collectively than individually. So we have the business function groups, and then we have, we just went through a strategic planning process, and in that process, we engage members in a few ways. We did a couple of online surveys, each round of which we were feeding back to members what we were hearing and what we were being told in terms of what people wanted us to focus on. We did interviews with members. We selected a number and then gave them to the facilitators that were doing the planning process for us, and then they went out and had anonymous interviews with those members. And then we found a few ways. This was a lot of it was online, to share back to the membership how the process was going, what we were hearing, and getting their comments and thoughts on changes people thought should be made to the strategic plan. And the plan was approved at the beginning of the pandemic. Sorry, the pandemic's a blur. So much has gone down in the last year. Some other things we've started to do And this has been things I've wanted us to work on, is we've embarked on member education. And so last year, and all of this happened last year, so it all happened online. We started to do an annual co-op history overview for members, because we have a lot of turnover, not in membership, but in the people who are working for a member who will be engaging with us. So we do an annual webinar on the history of the co-op, where we come from, why we do what we do, and sort of all that stuff. We have done an overview on the co-op sector in BC with Vancity Credit Union, and that was for our members. It was actually public, because one of the things we heard back in our strategic plan was the members actually wanted more education on co-ops itself, or themselves, and the sector, and sort of the why and the wherefore and how to. So we're starting an educational series that began with that webinar, and the next versions of those will be basically showcasing different co-ops to the membership. And those co-ops, most of the ones we're going to be meeting with first will be newer co-ops, younger co-ops. There's a new artist-run co-op out of Vancouver called Value that we're going to have on. There's a co-op here that is doing stuff with folks who are struggling with addiction. So we're going to have them on to talk about their work, and also to link very clearly the work of cooperatives with a social justice lens and a social justice framework. And we've done some work. We've done training with our board on what does it mean to be a board of directors for a co-op, because everybody on our board, they all have boards and they are used to board models, but there's some differences when you're governing a cooperative than maybe if you're at a library or part of municipal government or those kinds of things. So the education piece will be playing out over the next couple of years. And this year, we're going to be developing a member engagement strategy. One of the challenges we face is that a lot of the folks who were here in the early days of the co-op, so like 13, 14 years ago, before it was legally formed, a lot of those folks have aged out of the sector. They're retiring. They may have moved on from the organizations they were originally at, but a lot of those sort of early champions of the work of the co-op are no longer involved in the work. And so there's a whole new cohorts of folks coming in who don't have a history with the co-op. And we're spending a lot of time thinking about how do we build good relationships with those folks, and relationships that feel reciprocal and that matter. So I'm just checking out my notes. Oh, two other things we're going to be working on this year is an equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy for the co-op, as well as a strategy on what our role is in decolonization and reconciliation. It can be quite clear what the role of a library might be in the realm of that work, but it's less clear for us what our role might be, because we're a step behind the public face, if you know what I mean. We're kind of behind the screen. And so we're going to be exploring those questions. I might have hit everything I wanted to talk about. I'm just scanning the notes really quickly. I think that's everything. Simon, I can pause there.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That was super illuminating and very thorough. So we'll now pass it over to Sarah. Sarah, can you hear us?
It looks like we lost her.
Hopefully she can jump back in.
Yes, but just in case, maybe we can wait for her. But there is a question here in the Q&A section. So what has been the impact of the growing use of recommended candidates to the democratic governance of cooperative? And and it added, for context, some of the boards of our largest cooperatives, Coast Capital, Meridian, and MEC, use this tactic of recommending some candidates, but not others. And, oh,
sorry,
Hey,
I just changed room. Not the best decor.
perfect.
Grace, maybe we can get to that question after. Is that okay?
Yes, no problem at all.
Okay.
The floor is yours, Sarah. Thanks so much.
Sorry. I hope my connection will be better now. I'm here from Brussels. It's nice to be in contact with fellows from Canada. I'm actually half Canadian on my mother's side, so it's very nice to be here, even virtually. Thank you very much for the invitation. This is a very interesting conversation that we're having, and I'm really looking forward to the rest. So yes, I am indeed public affairs officer for SMART, but the hat for which I was actually invited here, I think, was also because I'm chair of the ethical committee, which is a new body of SMART. But before I start to talk about this and the democratic participation processes that we've installed, I'd just like to explain to you just a little bit in a nutshell what SMART is. It will make it maybe a little more clearer why we do what we do. So basically, we're a cooperative of freelancers. We count in Europe about 35,000 members in nearly 40 cities in 8 countries, most of which are based in Belgium. We started out actually as a nonprofit organization for artists in Belgium. And today we're much broader and cover more countries and more sectors of activities. So we consider ourselves as a shared company, which offers its members tools and services to develop their own activity autonomously, but while also accessing a double solidarity. The first one is linked to the fact that we salary the freelancers, and the second one is linked to the mutualization of means. It means that all the benefits are reinjected in services that we provide to our members. So our services, they rank from legal, financial, administrative, training, economic support, but also workspaces. And we really, these are all aiming at supporting the professional activity of freelancers. But actually, we have a very wide variety of workers. We have true entrepreneurs, we have people who are slashers, we have occasional workers. So there's also a very different use of the cooperative to work from our members. So basically, yeah, we allow to reconcile the status of a salaried worker for the better protection, but also to work in an autonomous way, which we find very important. But as I said, we haven't always been a cooperative. It was only in 2015 that we decided that we wanted to become a cooperative. It was after we had started already to have partnerships in different countries, because we realized that actually it was the model that was best adapted to the relationship that we have to our members and our members have to us. Basically, the members have 3 roles within SMART. On the one side, as I said, they're entrepreneurs. They develop economic activities because they have to find their own work opportunities. On the second side, and they're also salaried workers. When they're getting the job done, they're salaried. And on the other hand, they're also part of the democratic governments. They participate in it. And in the cooperative, this is embodied by the fact that they're shareholders. And when we were a nonprofit organization, we did have, Simon, what you explain is these basic democratic bodies of General Assembly and elected boards members. But that was it. And it was quite low, even you had a very low participation. But before we even became a cooperative, we wanted to change that. And we wanted our members to be part of, wanted them to design the cooperative and what type of cooperative we're going to become. And we wanted to do that with us. We want them to co-design this change with us. But the thing is that we already had tens of thousands of members. So the question was, how do you have all these people participate in this process? And this is when we just started to develop what we call the SMART in Progress. And it started in Belgium in 2015, 2016. And we actually had different ways to involve our members. We asked them to write articles. They could share their thoughts on blogs with specific threads. We also had what we call small talks, which were basically gatherings where members could discuss about how they saw the evolution of SMART. And most of all, we had the 4 working groups that gathered members, employees like me, but also partners of SMART. And there were 4 topics that were to be addressed regarding the cooperative. So one was about the economic model, one was about how we improve the tools, the other one was about improving democratic participation, and the other one was it was called a co-op with who and for who. And the idea here was to validate or not the fact that the cooperative would open up to other sectors of activities than the only creative sector. And the answer was unanimous. I participated specifically in this working group, just as a normal participant. And one of the recommendations was, yes, SMART should open up to anybody who needs it, and not only to the creative sector. But in order to do that and to remain a responsible employer and to safeguard the values of SMART, it's important to create an ethical committee. So this was one of the recommendations that came out of this working group. And so the idea of these working groups is that members would gather, members and employees would gather, would debate of many times. We had like 7, 8 encounters of 3 hours each, where we debated, and we laid down recommendations in the end, which were validated by the board and the General Assembly. So this recommendation was validated, and then the next question is, well, how do you set up an ethical committee? So the following year cycle of SMART in Progress, we actually had a working group called on the functioning, how would this ethical committee function? And so we made some proposals, some suggestions and recommendations, which were all validated by the board and the General Assembly. And so I was coordinating that working group. And therefore, in 2018, I was asked to set up this ethical committee. And following the recommendations, it was important for us to have some randomly drawn members in order to reflect the diversity of the members, but also to get into the democratic government some people who maybe would not have voluntarily suggested be volunteers to participate in such a body. So basically, it's not all members are randomly drawn. We have the members that are freelancers. We have half of the ethical committee is made out of these members, and they're randomly drawn. And then we have 2 advisors, because it was important for us that we have people that are really on the ground, on the front line, and always in continual contact with their members, but that also know the structure from within. And then there's the chair, that's me, and we have a secretary that helps us out also. And we also accompany ourselves by 2 experts, because none of us are actually experts in ethics, right? So we needed to be guided. And so we found a member of Copanam. Copanam is a Coopérative d'activité d'emploi. It's a particular form of cooperatives in France. And she is a member of the ethical committee of Copanam. And we also have the ex-president of the French-speaking Federation of Medical Houses. So it's a totally different sector. And I must say that it's very interesting to have these 2 people with a very different experience in ethics on board. It's really enriching. So what we did is when we had the first meeting of the ethical committee was actually a retreat, a 2 days retreat. And we did this because we thought it was important that we got to know each other, and also to build a trust among ourselves, and also to have time to really get into it, to start right away. What are we talking about? Why are we here? How are we going to work together? And we had a second retreat when part of the ethical committee was renewed for various reasons. They were all sad to leave, but it can happen. And that was in February 2020. So luckily we could do it right before we were shut down. And it actually really helped us to continue to work serenely even during confinement and online, basically, because we can't meet each other in person anymore. Yes, and so it really facilitated the debates, the trust, and the dialogue, which is still ongoing online. So what does the ethical committee do? It's an independent body that reports to the General Assembly. It's an advisory body, and it acts by ways of recommendations. And all the decisions that we take, we actually do it through sociocracy, basically. So you mentioned that too, Simon. I'm very happy. I think it's something that works really well, especially with such diverse group of participants. And so it's the first time that SMART actually has this way of working with people who are randomly drawn. Sociocracy is something that we're using more and more. And we want to systemize a little bit more, but it depends on different working groups, of course. And it's a very interesting body. It's changed a lot of practices within SMART. I'm really happy about it. And well, what I've personally learned from all these experiences of participatory governance is, and especially with the ethical committee, is that it's this random selection with sociocracy. Those together really make a very positive and constructive dynamic, and it's even very enriching at a personal level. And I thought that I've found that the implications of the people who are randomly selected was even more, I want to say, professional than those who voluntarily go to certain working groups. They're really there to work. They're really serious about it. I'm not saying that the others are not, but it's another level. So yeah, it's very challenging to create participatory governance when you have such a broad membership, when you have tens of thousands of members. I think it's, maybe we can't ask everybody to participate. And as I said, we have very different types of members too. I mean, some only declare 2 contracts a year, and we can totally understand that they may not be interested in participating in the governance of the cooperative if that's a relationship to it. But others really work all year long through the cooperative. And for those people, I think it's very important to be able to participate. And I think it's very important to give means to people to be able to participate. But clearly, if you want to do that, it takes a lot of energy and time, especially when you have so many people. And it's you really need to diversify the ways people can participate. So, as I said, we organize working groups. Some are online, some are offline, and actually some people prefer to be present physically, but others feel more at ease behind a screen. So it's good to have those 2 ways of organizing working groups. Events are very important too, and also multiplying the ways people can participate. So some people would prefer to write things, and it's good to give them that opportunity as well. And we're also starting, recently we started to develop more like kind of podcast models, which are very interesting as well. But another thing is that if you're going to get people to participate in how the cooperative lives and to make recommendations, you also have to make sure that you can follow what is said, and that they're not just there just to say you do it. You have to, if there are recommendations that are put on the paper, you have to be able to follow them, and you have to make them visible. And sometimes the time's a little bit longer than what is expected from the members, but it's an important point, otherwise people may be discouraged. Yeah, I would say this was our experience in redenomizing democracy within our cooperative, and I would be very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah, and for joining us so late in your evening as well. So I think at this point, the only thing we have planned is if anyone wants to have a discussion or some questions about this topic. So Sarah, Kevin, and I are here, and I think we'd all love to just engage with any thoughts you might have on these topics, or any suggestions you have, or things that have worked for you or haven't worked for you to keep this conversation flowing. So Grace, maybe we could, Grace, maybe could you remind the participants just what the best ways to submit questions are on this particular setup? And then we can use the queue.
Yes, of course. So you can use the Q&A section and also the chat box. So don't hesitate to ask questions. It looks like we have 2 questions or 2 comments. So I think it's a question from Lynn asking, can you speak to platform cooperatives or platform cooperatives? So I don't know if one of you talked about this, so maybe you can go further on that.
I think Sarah would probably be the best placed practitioner to speak about that, but just my quick comment on that is that I think it's a fascinating movement, and I think we just have to be very careful and deliberate about how we try to structure democracy within platform cooperatives, because it's a completely different way of organizing. And as Sarah mentioned, a lot of stuff is now done, there's multi-homing, there's, a lot of different technology interfaces, and the idea of trying to involve so many different members in a democracy will be more and more challenging. So I'm undertaking some research on that, but I would love to hear Sarah or Kevin's take on the real world of platform co-op democracy.
Well, it's a fascinating movement. We are part of it. We are often identified as a platform co-op, as we have a digital platform where members can really develop their activities, declare things, and so on. But we were born before the movement, so for us, it's still a debate. We clearly are a co-op, and we clearly have a platform, and we clearly support the movement because we think that with the digital evolutions going on, it's crucial. And also all the challenges in the world today, we really need to enhance democracy within our structures at every level. And platform co-ops, for me, have that in their essence. But of course, it's not just because you're a platform co-op that you are democratic, and you have to make sure that you provide the members with all the means to do it. There are a lot of very interesting organizations out there. There are a lot of different models, actually, and actions of platform co-ops. We support them because we really think it's the future, given the evolution of technology, and we just hope that they're really going to grow. We see a lot of small initiatives, and we want to see them grow, and we would also love to help our members be able to develop some here, because we're also trying to network our members as much as possible so they can be stronger together rather than individually alone. But the question was not very specific, so I don't know what exactly to say more, and maybe Kevin has something else to say about the topic.
No, not really. You've covered it well, I think.
Grace, maybe we could touch on the question from the Q&A board that you had mentioned before. Yes. So what's been the impact of the growing use of quote unquote recommended candidates to the democratic governance of cooperatives? So Kevin, did you have any thoughts on that, on the appropriateness of having a preferred slate for elections?
I do, and this comes particularly out of experience here with Vancity, which many people will be familiar with. So if you don't know the history of Vancity, it's fascinating. Originally started with some very progressive values, some folks in East Vancouver. It was the first, if I remember correctly, the first financial institution in Canada that would offer mortgages to a woman without having a male co-signer. It was the first financial institution in Canada that would offer mortgages to people in the east side of the city. And often that would be folks who were racialized and working class. But there was a period, see, here's where my politics come into play. From my lens, nothing is neutral because we all bring our worldviews and our desires with us in the work that we do. And so the control of an organization or an asset can be a platform to try to move a political agenda and a desire. That's kind of natural. We're humans, we act that way. There was a period of time when Vancity was controlled by people on the board who were right-wing in their values, and they were supporting financially neoconservative and neoliberal think tanks with donations and a whole bunch of other things. And there were progressives in the city who decided to organize to try to basically take back control of the co-op, if you will. You know, I'm cutting corners here a bit on the history. But then for a long period of time, in the period of time that I came into awareness of Vancity, there were slates on Vancity. And when I first became sort of into my political work in the late 90s, early 2000s, and there were big issues that would later develop with the slates, and they're no longer allowed. But at that time, they could be a shorthand to people who were members of Vancity who simply did not have the time or capacity, which from my understanding, from my personal experiences, most members don't have the time or capacity to be up to speed on all the stuff that's going on in a co-op. You have to have the ability to get your head inside that. And often that can come with economic privilege, to be able to have that time and space to get your head inside what's going on in your co-op. So for me, as someone whose politics are very left-wing, I wanted to make sure that the credit union was being controlled by and directed by folks who shared my worldview, so that the actions of the credit union would, for me, be enhancing justice in terms of the work they were doing. And for a period of time, slates, now the slates weren't recommended by the organization, but you could tell by the name of the slate what the political affiliation of the folks on it were. I'm not saying it was all good news and roses, and they're, like I said, they're no longer doable for very good reasons, but they were useful, I think, at a moment in time, which is slightly different from the question of, hey, so-and-so is being recommended. I think that has its own issues. When I see the recommendations from an organization, you could use recommendations to advance certain mandates. In particular, if you're exploring equity, diversity, and inclusion, you know, a lot of cooperative leadership is white and middle class. And there could be, perhaps these are steps in a way to helping diversify that leadership. Now, I'm not saying it's the only way, but it could be one tool in the box. And potentially a useful one. So yeah, I have different thoughts on it. For me, it depends on what the goals are behind the recommendations, because it can also be used as a tool to basically perpetuate control of a co-op in a way that may not be supporting member engagement. I'll hold there.
Sarah, do you have any thoughts from your experience or practice at SMART?
So on diversification of the participants, it is an important topic, and it's also about the diversification of the members, especially when you're in this freelancing or creative sector. You have a lot of people who are in fact well educated, brought up middle class probably, and we really want to diversify the origins of them and also the fields of activity of our membership, because we think it's important, and diversity is important in the society, and we think that the cooperative world should also be more diverse. And here in Brussels, at least, we have a certain population that's more attracted to it, unfortunately, or for our model. And so it's also for us, the education on cooperative, what it is, on cooperating with other cooperatives is also a very important work that we're developing. And yeah, unfortunately, when we did the random selection, we were all middle class white. And it's but that was a random selection, so I mean, it's yeah, I think it was just representative of our community. I mean, we have people from different origins, but most of them are white middle class. It's true, at least of origins. So we tried to change that with the random selection in the working group in which we were when we were trying to see how this ethical committee could function. One of the running gag was we need to have a single mother with 3 kids that lives in the middle of nowhere, and she has to be able to come over and work with us. And we really had that in mind, and we have to try and attract every profile, not only people from the big cities, but also from the countryside and more remote places. So you can try and do it with the participation, and you can do it through providing different tools, different times, schedules of the day. But it's complex, and we're trying to do our best. And indeed, also just to say, we were talking, Kevin, about what if you do recommendations and so on. It was one of the suggestions of the board that maybe the ethical committee should be more about people that know SMART well and that are kind of, say, les sages, the wise people. And we're like, yeah, but who are the wise people? How do we identify those? I would prefer to have, and the working group preferred to have people randomly selected that would be more closer to our base of membership. Yeah.
The only thing, if I can just add briefly, is that I think there might be some functional utility for it, but I find it deeply problematic from a democratic perspective if you already have so few options for members to influence their own cooperative, and then one of the biggest decisions is selecting the representatives, and if that process is nudged in some ways or in significant ways, then that further dilutes the influence they have. The only other thing I'll add is that the democratic innovations I mentioned earlier can actually be super powerful in terms of helping with elections. So knowing that many, thousands of members might be apathetic or unwilling to learn about each of the 7 candidates for board of directors, some people have advocated for using things like deliberative mini publics to be a filter and to go in depth and analyze and even interview all the board members and offer a 1 or 2 page, summary that's been kind of filtered through a randomly selected group of members. And that can then inform people as they go vote. So again, I think there's just one example of how we could use those tools to maybe take a different spin on how we choose board members. Hopefully that answers the question, and happy to jump to the next one, Grace.
Yes, so it's not really a question. I think it's a comment because Lynn talked about, the platform, but I think Sarah said if there is something more to say, so she added the interest is from decentralization in the virtual sphere, specifically community engagement, self-identity, data security, and trust. So if you have any comments to add to that.
I'm still maybe not 100% sure, Lynn, about the specific direction of the question in terms of is it, for example, how to democratize that, or maybe if you wouldn't mind just speaking a bit to what particularly you're interested in.
We can wait for her answer, but I have another question for you. What would you suggest to introduce the true meaning of democracy to members, including board members that generally consider themselves as tenants in a medium-sized housing co-op that offers no education? So who wants to go?
You're both, I guess, more practitioner-oriented than I am. So do you think any kind of definition or conceptualization would work best?
I'm sorry, I didn't really grasp the question.
Okay, so the question is, what would you suggest to introduce the true meaning of democracy to members, including board members that generally consider themselves as tenants in a medium-sized housing co-op that offers no education?
So the question is about the meaning of democratic participation at the different levels, if I understand correctly, and how we can do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is a big question. There are different elements. I think it's, I think you need different approaches. The board is essential. Having a board of people who are elected and that represent the membership with the different types of shareholders is essential. And you need some representation. You need people who are elected and that represent the membership, the members. But I think that we also need direct participation. We cannot only delegate certain aspects. Maybe for some more strategical aspects or for some certain things, it's good to have these people that represent us, just like in a normal democracy, like as the citizens in the country. But we also need to be able to speak. It was a bit your introduction, Simon. You can't just have very specific topics that are decided top down and that people have to validate or not. You also need, people must be able to also say what's important for them, what they want to see tackled, which may be different than those who are in more strategical aspects. So for me, democratic participation is about having all of these being able to be voiced. Those who are more in strategical aspects, maybe financial aspects, but also the people who are making the cooperative live on different aspects. And so I think that we've seen in different, even in our democracies, I don't know how it's like in Canada now, but at least in Europe, we have a lot of issues with representative democracy, and there is a real need for people to be able to participate because the challenges are huge. And we've seen that there's a divide between those who are governing and what the people are living. We saw it also with COVID. And if you're at a big cooperative, it's a risk too. So we have to be able to have people from the bottom and say, like, be able to implement what's important for them. People who make it live, the people who do the job every day, the people who make it live, be it a consumer or worker co-op. So really diversifying the ways and the voices and the means and how the voices can raise and how we want to deal with these problems, I think is the way to make this participatory democracy live and strong.
I'll add one. I really think that's an excellent answer, Sarah. I want to add just a couple of thoughts, which, as I'm listening, I'm trying to remind myself that challenges around democratic engagement are writ large, I think, in our cultures and right now. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. There's overwhelm. Pandemic aside, pre-pandemic, I think there's overwhelm. Massive economic insecurity can really impact the kind of time in an actual sense, but also the mental space that people may have to even be able to consider how they may participate in different structures in their community. The strains we're seeing ecologically, all of these things I think can feed, like at a core level, if I really think about it, the dominant message to me as a middle-aged guy in Canada has been that my primary function in this society is to buy stuff, and as much of it as I can possibly afford, and regardless of what that does to my credit rating, that my sole function is to consume, not necessarily to participate, not necessarily to really lean in, but to buy stuff. And I do think we're at the beginning of a cultural reframing of how we think about ourselves and how we frame our primary purpose as a pushback against what I would consider the failures of market failures, right? Climate change is the biggest market failure maybe ever. The housing crisis, these are all market failures. For me, they're manifestations of sort of that mindset that I was raised under, which is not about collective endeavor or cooperative endeavor, or thinking about our culture in that manner, but thinking about it primarily as someone who consumes. And I do think we're really seeing fissures in that approach. And I think we're starting, I don't want to say starting, but I do think there's a lot of hunger for different ways of engaging and structuring ourselves at all levels of our culture and society. And I think, and I could be wrong, but I think we're going to start to see the ripples of that in other ways that people want to have like collective ownership of their lives and their communities, if that makes sense.
So I see that Lynn had clarified the question. So specifically around democratizing community engagement online. And I think like from my point of view, it's almost endless. Like there's just so many really cool techniques that are being used out there. And I think on the positive side, what we've seen in our research so far is that platform cooperatives offer so many exciting opportunities for engagement, and you could use any of the techniques I had talked about in the introduction in an online setting as well, as long as you would tweak them in certain ways. But I've seen organizations discuss, for example, randomly selecting moderators to make sure that it's not the same kind of gatekeepers, making sure the conversation, flows in certain ways. Or you could use, these types of deliberative mini publics or other random groups as a way to bring in a broader set of members, and they can engage online in dedicated chat groups, for example. And so Stocksy is just another perfect example. I can't speak about them enough because they figured out a way to do an initiative process, which is very cumbersome in the political realm, but they now do that completely online and allow people to vote on and deliberate about a specific initiative that can then meaningfully shape policy at the co-op level. So I see tons of potential, and it would just be a matter of adapting whatever practices are most interesting to the unique nuances of working on a platform. But wondering if Kevin or Sarah, if you have any specific thoughts on that from what you've seen.
No, they say ladies first, but you can start sometimes.
Helps me formulate my thoughts to hear others. My mind was actually looking ahead to a question on the chat, which is around, but I think it connects. Look, I don't know if this is helpful or not, but in community organizing, one of the questions we often ask ourselves is, who are my people and what is the problem that we're trying to tackle? And then the third question is, what are the resources that we have available to us to bring together in order to get what it is we want? And so when I think about the beginning approaches to trying to democratize an existing co-op, which was one of the questions, I know my mind, but by people, I don't mean folks that look like me, but I mean people that may want something similar to me in terms of deeper democracy. And then building relationships, finding ways to build relationships together so we can get to a point to experiment. And I'll just throw this out very quickly. For me, a part of social change is about being willing to experiment and not succeed, but being able to be willing and able to learn from whatever the experiment was, if that makes sense. I think there can be great value in that. I try to work on 3 organizing principles: go, listen, and build. Go to the folks that I'm wanting to work with, listen to each other deeply to try to find out what it is we have in common, which will be both concerns and desires. And then from there, usually I find you start to find those tendrils where you can begin to build ideas and build actionable structures or ways of approaching the work. I'll hold there.
Yeah, I think there's, as you said, Kevin, there's different ways of wanting to participate. And I think people want to participate more than being consumers, as you were saying before. And we see that, and there's a lot of experimentation out there, and it's really interesting. But when it comes to using technology to engage people in the governance, I've seen that, like, we've all been on these meetings on Zoom and other tools, but there are some little things that make it more human. Sometimes when you're behind a screen, you can't really see the body language of the people with whom you're talking, so you only see their face, but you don't know if their leg is like that or if they're calm. And in fact, there's a lot of studies that show that it's very tiring for the mind to be on Zoom all the time, also because you see yourself all the time and you're not used to it. And but there are some things that can facilitate the communication. I've seen a world of difference. It may seem stupid, but for example, if you start a meeting by doing, in French we say la météo, so you ask everybody, how are you doing today? Like, this is a good day, a bad day. The meeting will usually go a lot better than if you just start right away with the program. And there's these little things that we kind of have to get accustomed to make these online technology more human, and to get back to, basically saying how you're doing, really, and having everybody saying how they're doing. It's just like when you're waiting for people at the meeting, and you have that little chit chat on the side that makes everything more lively, that you know them or not. It doesn't make it, and it's not important, but it's important that everybody can just say what's happening, and that it just makes the meeting so much more better. And it reduces so much the tension that there can be on content sometimes. And then also you were talking about how you could change the moderator, randomly select the moderator. But another thing is, for example, if you're having a meeting and you're writing notes, using things like Framapad or Slack, where everybody can work at the same, write on the same time. It also allows that it's not just one person taking notes and putting in their view, but everybody else can chip in. And it allows everybody to participate. It allows more transparency, a diversity of views. And so I think there's still a lot of things that we have to learn about these technologies. At least I've learned a lot this last year. But yeah, we should be more careful about that, on how technology may change the way we interact. It can be a great tool, but it also, there are some techniques to make it more human, and also to allow everybody to participate while using the digital tools, be them videos or writings, collective writings and stuff like that.
I think the next question by Tabata is a very, very big one. And I apologize, my ability to answer in French is non-existent at this point to give a good response. But if there's some general good practices or best practices applicable to all large co-ops in terms of their democratic life, from my point of view, I think there's been a lot of really cool frameworks developed around that. So for example, full information transparency, make sure there's governance is really good and representatives are held accountable, but the elections or appointment processes work really well. And then, like, I think for me, one of the biggest principles is look for meaningful, a large range of accessible, meaningful, robust opportunities for members to get involved and have a meaningful influence in terms of shaping their own cooperative. I think that's the principle that guides a lot of my interest in my research. And of course, you can use that to, also tackle other things like good governance. But I think we often forget about that part. And I think that's the most important thing when people join a co-op, because they want to be part of a democracy. But I'll pass it over to Kevin and Sarah if you have other big principles that you think are important.
I would just add one thing, is that you always have to be vigilant. You always have to be careful and care about the democracy in your cooperative. And I know that, as I said, we became a cooperative at a late stage. We were created in '98, and we actually became a co-op in 2000, or started to think of how we would become a co-op in 2015. And it allowed us to really put a lot of energy and thinking in how to make this democracy vibrant. And we're very happy with where we've come from and where we are now, but clearly we know that we can always improve. And I think that you always wanting to improve is also a key driver to make that real, and to be vigilant that it's still there and that you.
Kevin, any burning best practices that you want to share? If not, we can, go ahead. Okay, and then the last question we have on deck right now is, I think a great question on how can we, when we start a new co-op, how can we make sure we start it off in a very democratic way? Anyone want to jump in first on that question?
Go ahead, sir. I haven't been a part of starting a co-op.
Yeah, but we're already big. But from experiences of fellows in other co-ops and smaller co-ops, in particular, I'm thinking of here in Brussels, there's this supermarket actually inspired by one in New York, and I can't remember the name of the one in New York. But here it's called Biscope, and in Paris there's another one called La Louve. Basically, the principle is that you buy local, organic, and there's no cashier person, but all the members of the co-op have to work 3 hours and do whatever is necessary. It can be like putting stuff in the supermarket, or being the cashier person or whatever. And they started really small. And I find it super interesting as a participation, not only a consumer, to go back to that, but also they really started with a sociocracy. And I think that sociocracy, it's better if you start it from the beginning, and it's, I think, easier to do it when you're a small cooperative or in a small circle than when you're a big structure. So I, from the experience of my friends and fellows that are in this cooperative, that's something that I've heard from experience of a small cooperative, and that I think is important. So from the beginning, sociocracy, and also changing hats seems to be something that can really help to install this democratic participation.
The one thought that comes to mind, again, not having started a co-op, but having researched co-ops that are starting and read a lot about this, is that I'd say that I see maybe two schools of thought. Like some co-ops start, but they focus too much on the business and they forget the democracy part. Others focus, they want to stay directly democratic right off the bat, and, are very wary to let hold of that and then have elected representatives kind of take it in the direction they don't want to go. So maybe one thought would just be not to be too afraid of thinking about having some people be representative. And I think that links to what what I heard Sarah share as well, that it doesn't mean that by default you go from being a small group of people making decisions together to then having an oligarchic board of dictatorial board members. I think you can set things up from the beginning using things like, small committees, using sortition, using election, but, a lot of recall and one term only, where you can give a lot of people the possibility to get some experience making decisions and broaden those skills. But you've set things up so that as you grow and become more representative, you avoid too much power becoming centralized at the top. So I would not fear representation, but just be very deliberate and vigilant, as Sarah said, to prevent some of its worst consequences that can happen and threaten what was most cherished at the beginning.
Okay, so it looks like we don't have any more questions. So just to let everyone know, so the webinar is recorded, so you will all have access to it after. So I don't know, I'm just going to give a minute if there is another question. And other than that, I will conclude the meeting. So I'm just going to wait a few. Okay, so Simon, there is a question for you. I think at the beginning of your presentation, you were talking about different resources and people would like to have access to it. So how we can have access to it?
I'll just put my email in the chat then, and feel free to send me an email, and I can figure out what would be most interesting and relevant to you, if that's okay.
Thank you. And also Sarah and Kevin, you can also, if you want, share your email and put it in the chat, just in case if the attendees want to, go further in the discussion.
And from my point of view, I'm more than happy to connect with anyone who's interested in this topic. It's just, I think it's endlessly fascinating. So don't hesitate if you have any questions or thoughts or disagreements with anything I said, because I would love to have the conversation.
So it looks like I don't have any other question. So I would like to thank you, the three of you. It was really an interesting discussion, and also thank you to all of our participants, and thank you to André for the interpretation. So have a good day, and I don't know if there is the sun where you are, but yes, enjoy the sun. And
Thank
good
you.
night
Merci
to you,
beaucoup.
Sarah.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. It was very nice.
Merci beaucoup. Bye
Au
bye.
revoir.